Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us at this edition of Leak Project. We have Derek Tyler with us. Now, he is author of the book Alien Contact, The Difficult Truth. What we will show you on the cover of the book here, it looks like I don't know, like a logo or an insignia of something that a military officer would have, but it's very far out. It's almost like a combination of a reptilian dragon consuming the planet within his gut. So that's fascinating. But it's interesting circumstances with. I just did a podcast on the possibility that ETs are clones based on data from Daryl Sims, which he says he used to work for the CIA and he's been a lifetime abductee, his son, his dad as well. And, he looks at it as very nefarious. He doesn't like it. Some people say, oh, man, I want to get abducted. And other people say, it's happened to me and it isn't as cool as you think it is. So, first of all, I want to say thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so what exactly happened then with you as far as the experience that you had the first time?
By the way, I've known Daryl Sims since the 90s, and he's much closer to the truth than most people seem to be. The, the fact of being abducted, there's nothing good about it at all. It's nothing anyone should wish for. Um, by the time I started having my first memories of being abducted, even though apparently I'd been abducted prior to that, I'd already probably interviewed 3,000 abductees, I suppose, and contactees. I stopped counting back in the late 90s at 2,000, so I've added a lot more since then. One thing that you realize when you speak with that many abductees is that you hear basically the same story over and over from people who have absolutely no relation to each other. And in the beginning, my story was very much like that. I related in detail in the book. It's somewhat difficult to talk about the abductions themselves because one thing that they do to us is they they seem to use a post-hypnotic suggestion, among other things, that makes it very uncomfortable for us to talk about these things. It doesn't seem to kick in when I write about them, but when I try to talk about them, I tend to get very jittery and nervous and pacing, and my chest tightens up and it becomes hard to breathe, et cetera, et cetera. So it's somewhat difficult to talk about them, but nevertheless, I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you've talked to over 3,000 people and their experiences.
Yes.
Was it via phone? I mean, do you do hypnosis, regression sessions with
No,
them?
it was mostly online. Um, I don't really recommend regression for people. Matter of fact, I think it's generally a very terrible idea. Unless you have a certain specific reason that you feel you need to be regressed, I recommend that you don't do it because when you undergo regressive hypnosis, you will eventually end up reliving those experiences as you recount them and re-experience them. It'll just be just like having them happen to you again. And there's nothing there that you want to have to relive. I mean, some of the things are very uncomfortable and very frightening. And for most people, I would recommend that if you happen to not remember your abduction experiences, thank your lucky stars and let it go.
Well, when was your first experience? And if you can, give us as much detail as possible for the skeptics out there and help me and yourself convert any skeptic out there that's saying no, this isn't true, this can't be true. I just was told on the TV the government said there's no such thing as alien sun, so I believe them. And I just got my
Well,
flu shot too. It's
I've
really
got
good.
a, I've got a whole chapter in my book about skeptics, and it basically takes their entire argument and dismantles it piece by piece and leaves nothing left in the end but the burning ruins of what used to be their position. Um, Other than that, I showed some signs earlier in my life that I didn't realize at the time, but they were classic abduction symptoms. One of them is that I had a tendency, starting when I was about 18, to burn out streetlights whenever I'd approach them. Not every time, but very often. Sometimes three streetlights within a single block. When I would walk past them or when I would even drive near them, they would just blink off. And still, I didn't I didn't realize that I was an abductee, and I interviewed many abductees in the meantime without ever applying it to myself, even though actually Daryl Sims told me back in about 1998 that I better accept the fact that I was an abductee. I didn't believe it then either. Um,
Do you have Rh negative blood?
I don't know what my blood type is, honestly. My grandmother did.
Okay.
I don't know what mine is. I should, but I don't. I'm embarrassed to say.
But that's all right. You know that your grandma had that blood type, so either way, you would at least have that hereditary. Now, also, are you Irish, and do you have any Native American blood?
I don't have any Native American blood. My mom's side was Scottish and English. My dad's side was Dutch.
Okay.
So I'm not Irish, although I understand that that's a common indicator of some people, but
Not
it's
everybody,
not
though,
it's not
obviously.
everything.
Yeah.
And the Rh negative factor, all that's necessary for that is to have one parent or one grandparent have Rh negative, and you will be almost well, I don't know the exact percentage, but you have a far greater chance of being abducted if you have Rh negative blood in your family.
Right. Absolutely. So I know it's in your book, and many people are going to have an opportunity, especially after they watch this podcast, to pick up Alien Contact, The Difficult Truth. It's available on Amazon. And folks, just so you know, every single review on Amazon is 5 stars. And as a matter of fact, there were so many 5-star reviews on there that were so quickly that I guess some of them were taken down. Derek was telling me the Amazon has some policy or something like that. I don't know exactly how that works, but the fact that one thing that I think is fascinating about just even only talking to you for less than 10 minutes here, Derek, is I can tell you seem nervous. And it's not like nervous in the sense where you've got to like, okay, what do I say next? I'm going to make this up. It's more like, man, this kind of freaked me out, and now I'm talking about it. And I appreciate you having the guts to actually do this. And one thing that's nice about coming on Leak Project, many of the people that I've talked to in the past, after they come on the show and give their testimony, they feel a lot better after the show. So hopefully that'll be the same with you. And there's a lot of people that have, said, hey, the things that he or she is talking about, I've gone through those same experiences. So it's a good way for other people to connect. Now, how old were you when you first? Well, no, talking two things at once. Let's go back to, you said you wrote a chapter in your book about the skeptics that'll blow them out the water. Well,
Yeah.
give us a taste of that.
Well, the skeptical position has so many holes in it that it's like Swiss cheese. They most commonly will claim to be operating from using the scientific method, which unfortunately you can't apply to something like alien contact, alien abduction, alien presence around Earth. The scientific method is designed specifically to be utilized with regard to natural processes which can be observed, repeated, tested, experimented on. You can't do that with alien contact. You can't cause them. I use an example of, let's say there was a primitive tribesman in the Amazon jungle that was walking through a clearing one day, and an F-16 flashed over his head with his afterburners blasting. And he went back to the tribe and explained it to them, and they said, well, we don't believe it because it's not repeatable. That's the first thing scientists will say. Is it repeatable? Yes, if you own the F-16, it's repeatable. But if you don't, there's no way that you can ever cause that to be repeated. There's no way that you can ever cause any part of the F-16 to be subjected to testing or to observation by others. It's the same thing with UFO sighting. You can't make it happen again while the scientists are watching. You can't retrieve a part of it, take it back to their lab for them. And if you did, they would immediately make you try to prove a negative, which is known to be impossible. They'd say, prove that that's not from Earth after all, which is impossible to do that. Scientists have a very bad tendency they won't examine or investigate the best cases. They'll investigate the ones which are easy to disprove and debunk. As a ufologist, those are the ones which we're not interested in either, except to get them out of the way because they don't matter and they don't count. They're not legitimate sightings. We're not interested in them at all, other than to file them as bogus. Nobody hates frauds worse than we do. So scientists operate from the position of believing that they have the answer before they've even asked the questions. They spent, for instance, they spent over $1 million a couple years ago studying the flatulence of minnows in the ocean. They were trying to see if they use that as a communications device, bubbles coming out of them. They've got $1 million to do that, but they claim they don't have enough money to study UFOs. It's the most important topic ever in human history. And if scientists were really doing their job, you wouldn't be able to stop them from studying this. Instead, they absolutely refuse to discuss it. They refuse to study it. And it has nothing at all to do with the scientific method. That's not what the scientific method is. And they should be the first to know that you can't even utilize it on this because it's not a natural event. It's not something that they can measure unless an alien happens to show up at MIT and say, measure me, weigh me, here's my ship. If that doesn't happen, the scientific method has nothing to grasp onto, and it's basically trying to use a square peg in a round hole.
Well, do you think that they've got plenty of evidence behind the scenes and there's already been cases where maybe a UFO, like, do you think Roswell was legit or a government deal?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was absolutely legit. They've got more evidence than you could ever need as far as the government is concerned, sure, because they work directly with aliens. They've signed a secret treaty back in the late 50s, and it involves the exchange of technology. The technology comes our way, and in exchange, they have basically free access to abduct and experiment on our people as they wish, to sometimes eliminate people. A lot of our people that are taken are never returned at all. And the government has been working hand in hand with aliens for over half a century now. But the penalty for revealing that, if you're someone that's in the program, is usually death, and many people have been killed because of that. If you want to know the truth about ufology, follow the trail of dead bodies, and it'll lead you there.
Tell us about your first experience that really shook you.
Well, the first experience I had that really shook me wasn't an abduction. It was a sighting. It happened in 1984 during the summer. I was out at my parents' house just outside of a town called Yakima in central Washington State. And there's a facility there. It's a large hospital. It's used for the constant care of people that are severely retarded. It started out as a TB hospital, but now its purpose was changed. And ever since I've been alive, it's been used as a facility for people that are so seriously handicapped that they need constant care all the time. And a UFO came up. It's located at the top of a hill, and a UFO came up a small hill which was behind it. It was big. It was brightly lit up, and it hovered just maybe 3 feet off the ground right beside this facility. The last place I would have ever expected to see a UFO. And I watched it for 20 minutes. All the hair on my body stood up as soon as I saw it. It was like a double convex lens. It was shaped like a magnifying glass lens, rounded on both the top and the bottom. And along the center line, it had a row of lights of multiple colors that changed colors in such a way that it looked like there was a belt of lights that was moving around the craft in a counterclockwise direction. It was actually just the lights changing color in sequence, but that was the appearance. And after 20 minutes, a pair of F-16s came blasting in. They had to come from Fairchild Air Force Base near Spokane, Washington. It takes them almost exactly 20 minutes to get there from Fairchild on afterburners, so those jets were launched basically as soon as that UFO came into view. Those jets were airborne. And they tipped their noses upward, which is what they do when they want to be able to maneuver at low speeds without falling out of the air. It gives them more surface area for the air to flow over, and it lets the jets stay airborne at a lower speed. They tipped their noses upward, and they started buzzing this plane really close to it, within a few feet of it, one at a time, repeatedly, and it completely ignored them. It did that for another 22 minutes. I was unable to see underneath the craft due to some trees that were planted down lower on the hillside. The top of the tree line was blocking my view underneath the craft, so I couldn't see what came in or went out of it. But these jets continued. They were clearly very irritated. They didn't shoot at it, but they were clearly locked onto it and ready to shoot at it if they felt it was necessary. It completely ignored them. And after another 22 minutes, 42 minutes total time for the sighting, this craft silently rose up and went back over the top of the hill that it had come in on, which was just slightly higher than the level of the facility. It was called Yakima Valley School. And it went down behind this hilltop and out of sight with the jets still buzzing it. And after that, there was no longer any question about whether they were here, whether the military knew about them, whether they considered some of them to be hostile.
And how long after that did you have your first abduction?
Well, the first memory that I had probably happened maybe 10 years ago. It's later than most people. Most people are typically abducted for the first time at around the age of 7, and I did have a sighting when I was that age, but I don't recall an abduction associated with it. But probably around 10 years ago, I started having abduction memories, and they were always in the form of being taken out of my bedroom in the middle of the night. I would be returned home again in the middle of the night, and it would seem that I would wake up out of a sleep as soon as I was, as soon as I was brought back, which allowed me to retain some memories of the events that happened. Most of the time, that they will delete those memories from your mind, and most of my experiences, have also been deleted from my mind. They erase your memory. But in my case, there were a number of times when they didn't successfully erase it, and I had some very clear and distinct memories of what took place, and none of it was good. And it had to do with gray aliens and military. The military is responsible for probably over half of the abductions now, and the military has their own grays. I've been abducted by the military that had grays working with them, but the military was in charge of the operation, clearly.
Okay, so you knew Daryl Sims before you started having experience or memories about your abductions?
Yeah, I got acquainted with Daryl Sims back in the 90s on, well, we both ran UFO channels on what was called Internet Relay Chat. It was a primitive internet communications chat room type system back before we had things like Facebook.
Okay. So, but you didn't actually start having memories until 10 years after that. And you told me that you just said a minute ago that Daryl said you probably better just get used to the fact that you're an abductee. Well, how did he know? Like, what connected the dots there for you guys?
Well, I suppose it could have been that I did talk about burning out streetlights, and that's pretty much a classic. It's a classic abduction indicator. I'm by no means the only person that has experienced that. I don't seem to do that anymore, but probably for 15 years after I was 18, probably for the next 15 years, that happened to me regularly.
Well, what do you think causes that?
I don't really know what causes that. It seems to me that they somehow modify or enhance our body's natural electrical field, our aura. I don't know what else would really cause that to happen, and I certainly can't say for sure, but it's been reported on many occasions by many people.
Now, can you walk us through in as much detail as possible, put the Leak Project or the Leak Project audience in the picture about the first experience that you can really remember, and then why it was so horrifying?
Well, the first experience I remember, I woke up and I was on, and it was like a regular medical examination table, right? Like you'd find in a doctor's office. I was laying on my right side. There was a gray alien, and I'm talking about, there are several different types of gray aliens, but I'm talking about the classic ETs with the big almond-shaped black eyes. There was one near my head, there was one near my feet, and they did the dreaded anal probe to me, which is a classic. It's a classic story, that most abductees report. They did it to me too. It's nothing gentle. It's nothing pleasant. It's a pneumatic probe, which means that once they place it up against your body, it just goes, and it's all the way in. And it hurt like hell. And I opened my mouth to scream, and the gray that was standing near my head, he had some kind of a device in his hand about the size of a pack of cigarettes. He ran it over my temple. He didn't actually touch my temple, but it was very close to my temple. He just passed it across my temple, and as he did so, all the pain immediately stopped. I opened my mouth to scream, and I closed my mouth without making a sound. They keep us, anytime that I've been abducted, and I'm sure that it's the same with most people, they keep us in almost a zombified state. It's like you've had a lobotomy almost. You're unable to take actions on your own. You're unable to think clearly. You're unable to speak. You can't even come to the realization that it would be a good idea for you to try to get away if you can. And we're kept that way the whole time. So they from there they walked me into another room. We walked past a room where there seemed to be several, maybe a half a dozen. They looked like androids. They were lined up heel to toe in this room. They were human looking, but there was something familiar about them I couldn't place. Their heads were all bowed forward like they were robots that had never been turned on, you know what I'm saying? And
Right.
as we walked past them, I only had to view them for a few seconds. It occurred to me that I was looking at multiple copies of myself in this room. It was like they were copies of me that had never been switched on. And they took me into a medical bay. They performed surgery on me, which is described in the book. And that was the extent of my first memory. There's a little bit more to it than that because the aliens and our military both have, this is something that was hard for me to understand and believe, but they have technology which allows them to travel backward and forward in time at will, and they both use it whenever they want to. It's nothing hard for either one of them to do, either the military or the aliens. I don't know the origin of that technology, but I know that they both have it and can use it at will. And it's been used on me at least 4 different times, each time for a reason that would have never occurred to me. The first time that they used it was during the surgery that they performed on me. They got a result of some kind that wasn't satisfactory to them, and all of a sudden, boom, we were back in time, and they started the whole thing over, and they did it again. And they had to do it maybe 4 or 5, 6 times until they finally got a result that they liked.
What were they doing to you with surgery?
Well, they've done several surgeries to me. This one, I don't really know what they were doing. There was 2 gray aliens. One of them was working on each of my feet. I was awake and conscious the whole time, but I was stupefied, like I was saying, they always keep us. And one of the surgeons was not happy with the results that he got on one of my feet. And every time we would revert back to just before the surgery started, and they would do it again. And it was just like an instant flashback in time. And finally, they got the result that they were both happy with, and that's the end of my first memory.
Now, do you have scars on your feet?
Nope. They look just like they've never been touched. They look just the same. They have medical technology which allows them to heal any injuries or any scars within seconds, and you'll never have any evidence that they worked on you at all.
What about people that do have scars?
Some people do have implants, and some people do come home with such things as triangular pinhole marks on their body. I don't know the reason for that, but it's very commonly reported. I've never had any of those things myself that I know of.
So you go through these traumatic experiences, and they do these weird tests on your feet, and then you wake up from that. And what was that like? So walk us through the next 48 hours. Was everything normal, or were you like...
Well, I knew from having interviewed so many abductees in the past, excuse me, prior to this, I knew what was happening as soon as it started happening. I didn't have to wonder if I was going crazy or any of the things that many people experience because I'd already heard this story about the probes and stuff. I'd already heard this many times before, hundreds of times. So I knew what was happening. They use a combination, it seems, of hypnosis and drugs, and possibly other means as well, to delete the memories as much as possible from our minds so that we don't remember what happened. Most people that have been abducted, I don't think will ever know that they were abducted at all. If you sleep through till morning, you won't basically have any memory of what happened. You'll just think you had a series of strange dreams. If you wake up as soon as they bring you back, and I don't know what causes one to wake up or not, you can sometimes retain memories. And what happened in my case was I wrote them down. As soon as I woke up, I wrote down everything I could remember because I knew that if I waited till morning, I wouldn't remember anything. And by writing them down, it kind of set the memory in place, and then I could remember what happened. That happened on a number of occasions, both with military abductions and with alien abductions. Um, the Greys are an artificially genetically engineered beings. They're not a naturally occurring being. They are similar to almost cyborgs in a way. They don't have emotions like we have. They don't care if you're terrified. They don't care if you're in pain. They don't care about that at all. They are assigned a mission. They're used as slaves, according to my best sources, which ended up being quite good sources within the military and within the Black Ops. There's a person I refer to in the book as the Colonel, and he'd spent his whole career in Black Ops, and he educated me about many things. One of them was that the Greys they're a failed genetic experiment. They're considered to be a failed experiment on the part of the reptilians, and they were consigned to slavery, and they're basically used as slaves by the reptilians to do their dirty work, and apparently by the military as well at times. I've been abducted by the military before when they've had Greys working under their control.
Let's hear about that if we can. After that experience, how soon was it that you remember a military MyLab encounter?
Oh, I don't know. For a couple of years there, I was getting taken. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm just recovering from a pneumonia, so I'm a little bit weak and puny.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate you coming on the show.
I was taken up to 3 times a week sometimes, and there was there was no way to predict who was going to take me. Um, I'd say at least time my memories involved being taken by the military. The military seems to be able to know when aliens take us. Um, apparently, after you've been abducted by aliens, your psychic abilities are amplified for several hours, greatly amplified, they say. And then what the military likes to do sometimes is come in and abduct you for a second time in the same night. And then they will use you for their own purposes. For instance, they will utilize your artificially enhanced psychic abilities, and they will force you to be, for instance, a remote viewer, and they can use you for real-time invisible spying. They can use you for anything that they want. And the military, parts of our Black Ops military have declared war on us, and nobody should be under any illusions about that. They've declared war on us, and they are assaulting us daily. The mere fact that such things as chemtrails exist prove that. Chemtrails, among other things that they do, they are a method one method of terraforming this planet to the specifications of an alien race, the reptilian race. They're making our planet cooler. They're making it higher in radiation content. They are making it darker, and that's everything that the reptilians want. There's no other reason for chemtrails to be happening that's to our benefit. If any of it were to our benefit, they wouldn't be denying it so stridently as they do.
You know, it's funny because the past 3 or 4 days, I've noticed that the skies are bluer than they've been in over 10 years that I can remember. I remember back in the day when the skies used to be that deep, dark blue, the sun was yellow. Now the sun, at least what it looks like because of the ozone that's left, it's this bright, blinding white. And then the skies are usually this weird terraformed blue haze, like you said. It's interesting to see I'm excited to see what it's going to be like the next few weeks if they're going to stay away from the terraforming. And I've often wondered that before especially when I saw the Superman film, when the bad guys come down to Earth with that terraforming machine and they want to change the atmosphere for them. And I've thought that too. But if we could get more into your experiences, like in the military and stuff like that, walk us through some of those.
Well, I've never been in the military myself,
No,
but
the MyLabs experiments that you were going through.
well, okay, well I'll tell you about one thing that the military did to me. Um, they there was a military doctor, a human doctor. He was dressed in surgical whites. He had the surgical white cap on too. Uh, I could see that he had round glasses on, like John Lennon or Ozzy Osbourne wears, glasses with round lenses. He was wearing a white surgical cap, but he had bright red curly hair that was sticking out the bottom of the cap. He had one of those lights mounted on his forehead, and he had a device in his hand, which was it was basically two hollow half spheres. They were connected by a tube, and they weren't the same shape as my eyes, but they were the same shape as my eye sockets. And he had a device in his other hand that was like, well, first around the inside of these hollow spheres, each one of them had about 6 blades that looked just like X-Acto knife blades mounted around the inside edge of this sphere. And in his other hand, he had a device which was like a chainsaw trigger. He would push the trigger on this device, and the harder he would push it, the faster these blades would spin around the inside of these globes. And they were clearly going to mount these over my eyes and cut my eyes out. I don't know. I it's one of the There's only a few times that I was ever able to speak. It took all the willpower that I had in me, all of my effort. And I said, "Oh, please don't do that," as loudly as I could, and it came out in just the tiniest whisper. It didn't make any difference to them. They did it anyway. I don't know why. I assumed that it was to insert implants behind my eyes. But that was the end of that. After that, the memories are blurred and indistinct, and they're probably just part of a fake memory that they put in. They're known to put in fake memories sometimes to fool you into thinking that things weren't as horrible as they really were.
Have you seen the movie The Sixth Day by Arnold that Arnold Schwarzenegger is in?
No, I haven't.
Came out in the early 2000s, and in that film, cloning is popular. You know, somebody loses their cat, they just reclone it. And the guy that started the business, well, he keeps getting taken out in the film, so he just keeps cloning himself back. And it's interesting because in that series, it really makes you question the possibility of your consciousness and what is the soul, what is the spirit. You know, if you reclone your body, is your spirit connected to that as well? Because it's
They do have cloning. We've had the ability to clone people at least since the 30s, according to my connections, and they use it for the elite, basically, and they use it for people that they want to have access to, such as people like ex-presidents, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, people that are the financial elites. They're really running the show on Earth. The Illuminati, the people who run the Illuminati, they don't necessarily ever have to die, because if you have access to cloning technology and alien medical technology, which can extend your lifespan greatly, you basically have a recipe for eternal life. And if you're offered a recipe for eternal life, you absolutely will kill anyone to keep that option open. And there's no immune to them. They do utilize cloning. Some of the aliens, such as the Greys, do not have the ability to reproduce naturally. They're all clones. It's a mistake to think that any of these aliens, including the so-called friendly ones, have human-like emotions. They don't. They don't think in terms of if you see someone that's been hit by a car and is dying, you'll think, oh, that's a terrible shame. They'll think, let's just grab some cells so that we can clone him again and then move on. They don't have the same emotional content as we do. And the Greys don't seem to have any types of, they don't have any empathy, no sense of mercy, sympathy, nothing like that. They're like ants.
Well, I want to jump back to the experience you had when you said you saw yourself cloned, a whole bunch of your clones. And have you ever wondered if maybe you are a clone of yourself?
Well, I suppose it's possible. I don't think that I am. There's a different technique that they use, which is called synthetic beings. They're different from clones. And I think that what I was looking at was synthetic beings. As a clone, the clone has to be raised from infancy, right? When a clone is born, it's a baby. But there's another technique that they can utilize. It's alien technology. Um, they can take some cells from your body and they can create what's called a synthetic being, which starts out its life at the same age you were when they took the cells from you. And I think that that's what I was looking at. Apparently, they're not animated at the time. I don't know. But I know that from another experience that I've had when I was abducted, that they can actually literally remove your soul from your body. They have the ability to do that. It's kind of a complex subject. If you get right down to it, everything in the universe can be described as a form of energy, either potential energy, such as a rock, which is basically it's still atoms in constant motion. Our bodies are atoms and molecules and electrons in constant motion. We are energy, or it can be kinetic energy. And the soul, as it turns out, is basically a unique, distinct, complicated form of electronic energy. It's basically a waveform, and it can be, if you have the technology to do it, it can be measured, it can be copied, it can be removed and duplicated, it can be taken out. I don't know how they do this. They can take it out of your body, and they can insert their own consciousness into a person's body and control them. And they can literally store your consciousness in a container, like it must be some kind of a Faraday cage, I assume, until they're done using your body for whatever purpose they want, and then they can insert your consciousness back into your body again. It's one of those things that's so far beyond our experience that it's hard to imagine, it's hard to believe it could be possible. I don't know if I would believe it myself if it hadn't been done to me, but it's entirely possible, and they do it whenever they need to do it. You can't tell for sure who is really controlling the minds of our generals, of our president. You don't know, because it's no more difficult to abduct a president than it is to abduct you or me. They've got technology which allows them to return a person home by moving them backward through time to the exact same time that they were originally taken. It's just like they were never gone at all. And you won't be able to tell that they were gone. There's nobody to catch. There's nobody to hold responsible. There's no way to prove it happened. And there's no way to prove that the person they brought back is the same person they took. They might look the same, but who knows? And that's the first thing that terrified all of our generals when they began figuring this out back in the 40s and 50s.
So, what kind of safeguards have gone into place since then?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that there have been any safeguards. There's very little a person can do to prevent an abduction from taking place. If you're an abductee, you'll probably try anything and everything you can think of, but basically there's no way to prevent it. If they want you, they'll have you, and you can't stop them from coming and getting you. And what's happened over time is that our military parts of our military, not the whole military, but parts of our military have fallen into league or under the control of these intrusive, hostile aliens. Some of them are of hyperdimensional nature, meaning that they can exist in another dimension from ours, which we can't see them, we can't hear them. They could be in the same room with you, and you wouldn't be able to know they were there unless they came through into our dimension. It's this is why I say that you have to be able to break out of the box of conventional thinking, or you can't understand them. You can't try to limit aliens by the limits of our low parochial, low-class technology, because they're beyond science fiction, the things that they can do. They've had the ability to travel between the stars since we were living in trees. And to try to limit them by our scientific limits is a very bad mistake, because they know no such limits.
Where do they come from?
Well, it depends on who you're talking about. There's basically a multitude of alien life forms which are known to the government. I don't know the exact number, but I've heard it might be as high as over 160 different types of aliens. They, even the reptilians that I was speaking of, there are numerous different types of reptilians, and they all seem to have been interbred with each other to create new species along the way. I'm sure you've heard that abductees are used to make hybrids, right?
Right.
Well, it seems that this is just the last iteration of a process of making hybrids between races, which has been going on for a long time between other races. I don't think that any of the races that we're dealing with now were originally who we see now. I think they've all been hybridized at some point. According to my best contact, who I refer to as the Colonel, because I won't say his name. I promised I wouldn't, and I won't. But he was at least the rank of Colonel. According to him, alien medical technology shows that all DNA has a built-in timer, and the timer determines how long a species will last before it goes extinct. Eventually, that timer will go off, and at that point, the DNA has become basically worn out. And when that happens, it will become more and more, progressively more difficult to reproduce. And if it's an intelligent being, they will resort then to cloning. But with every generation of clones, you lose a little bit of information. It's not a perfect process. You lose a little bit of information, and the next generation becomes a little bit less efficient. It has a little bit shorter lifespan than the original did. And eventually, there comes a point where you can't even reproduce by cloning, and at that point, a race will go extinct. The only solution to this, as far as the information I've been given, is that they try to create hybrids with other intelligent races, which will then reset the genetic timer at zero, and they'll have a whole new, a whole new timer to work off of, millions of years potentially. Our sun is considered to be a third-generation star, which means that there were at least 2 generations of stars which existed and died before our sun was even formed. That gives a lot of time for alien races to have formed, to have existed, and to have hybridized with other races. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, and I find it fascinating, and your explanation thus far is one of the best that I've heard. And I've talked to people on ETs for years also. I mean, I've been a seeker of truth, and I know the truth is out there, like Fox Mulder in the X-Files, except for its leak project. And
I like the leak project a lot, by the way.
Thus far. What's that?
I like the leak project a lot, by the way. I like the subjects that you investigate. I think they're very intelligently chosen, and I like the high quality of the work.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. One of the things that I would like to know as well is if, obviously, here's what I think about space, and I could be wrong, but if space is infinite, if the universe is literally so big that it never stops, then in my mind, there's infinite races and beings out there. And size doesn't really matter in infinity, because it would be difficult to measure something saying that's bigger than that if really size doesn't matter, because it just goes on forever. Yet for us to conceptualize, I can definitely see how it makes sense. And with that said, 160 beings making contact with this planet right now from infinite opportunities, well, how many of those are nefarious? How many of those have our best interests at heart? How many of those are narcissistic? Are there any races out there that are so above and beyond this conscious level and technological level that they, I mean, there's got to be a balance somewhere. I don't think that, if everybody's a reptile and
Oh no, I
everybody's
didn't
an
say that.
engineer.
I'm not saying they're all reptiles by any
No,
means.
I know. I'm just
There
kind of
there
trying
are
to grasp all
there
this.
are many different types of alien races. There are many different types of synthetic races. You could say there's artificial intelligence, there are synths, there are clones, there are hybrids, there are robots. There are many different things which could be termed non-human intelligence. And there are many alien races, but alien races do not all come from distant stars. Some of them come through time, and some of them come through dimensions. Some of them exist in other dimensions. There are multiple dimensions, as it turns out. There are multiple universes existing in the same place at the same time, but they have different characteristics and they have different, apparently, physical laws. And many of these alien beings are hyperdimensional in nature, meaning that they exist in a, well, remember on Star Trek where they had those beings that vibrated at a higher rate than they did? They could only be heard as like a buzzing sound, like a mosquito.
I never
Remember
saw
that?
that one, but I like the concept.
Well, it's similar to what is apparently happening, and we don't really have the ability to travel between the dimensions, but they do. And so, and some of them are from, of course, from different stars. Many of them are, but many of them are a combination of those things: a different star, a different dimension, and sometimes a different time as well. And as you might expect, some of them don't care about us at all. Some of them like us. Some of them don't like us. Some of them utilize us as food. I could tell you about that if you like. It's
Yes.
nothing pleasant, but well, the gray aliens. We'll start with the gray aliens. They don't have any digestive system like we have. They don't have a stomach and esophagus. They don't have anything like that. So in order to take in and excrete nutrients, they have to do that in liquid form by smearing a liquid slurry over the skin and absorbing it through their pores and excreting it back out through their pores. The slurry that they utilize is composed of hydrogen peroxide, which acts as a binding agent and a sterilizing agent mixed with either bovine or human blood and some enzymes that they can extract from our organs and some organ secretions that they can extract from either human or from cattle. That's the reason that they had all the livestock mutilations back in the 70s and 80s. That's why those cattle were always drained of every drop of blood. They were being used by the Greys. They smeared on their skin, and eventually, I think it was in the early 80s or the late 70s, scientists at Lawrence Livermore Labs developed a method to synthesize human blood in large quantities, at which time the livestock mutilations ceased. You don't hear them happening anymore now at all. But this synthesized human blood was being turned over to the Greys for this purpose. And by the way, it wasn't just livestock that were mutilated. There were humans that were mutilated in the same fashion. They had their eyes and their genitals and their organs cored out. They were drained of blood. And from the condition of the bodies, it was obvious that this was all done while they were awake and alive. So it's nothing good. And that's just one example. The Draco reptilian, which are the main group of reptilians, the ones which are considered to be the reptilian royalty, excuse me just a second, they apparently get kind of a high off of consuming humans, whose flesh has been suffused with high doses of adrenaline. And so what they'll do is they'll kidnap, or they don't kidnap them themselves, but they have the Greys or our military units will do it. Because our Black Ops are in this with them. They'll abduct mostly children or babies because their bodies haven't yet been polluted by caffeine and nicotine and whatever else we put in our bodies as adults. And they will torture or mutilate them in order to produce the maximum amount of adrenaline in their bodies as possible, and then they will eat them alive. They don't eat anything which is already dead. That's what we're dealing with here. And these reptilians they've always been here. We've never been alone in this world. This is not just something that started in the 40s. We've never been alone here. If you look at the corporate logo of Alfa Romeo, you'll see a stylized reptilian eating a human, and it's built right into their logo. Look at it sometime.
What is it called again?
Alfa Romeo, it's an automobile manufacturer in Europe.
Oh yeah, that's the symbol.
Yeah, look at it.
Wow.
It's got a symbol of a stylized reptilian eating a human. And this has been going on all throughout our history, but we've been kept ignorant of the fact. The reptilians here mostly exist underground in deep underground layers that they've built out of what was originally underground caverns. They've enlarged them with their technology, but to them, we are a harvestable resource. And they basically told the military, as long as you keep us fed, we'll stay underground. And that's basically what they do. And they use the Greys to do their dirty work.
You know, I'm looking at this icon right now, and you are not exaggerating one bit. It's literally a giant serpent, and in the mouth of the serpent is a human with just his head and his arms poking out. And he's like, yeah,
Yep.
I'm so inferior to the serpent.
I'll tell you another one you probably haven't seen. If you got a dollar bill on you?
I'm broke, man. No, I've got a dollar bill somewhere. All I use is credit cards.
If you look at the back of a dollar bill, you see the Great Seal of the United States. It's an eagle, you know, the famous eagle on it. If you trace along the inside edge of the eagle's wings, you will see the jawline and the beginning of the outline of a head of a gray alien. If you trace it on up and around, you'll see the rest of the gray alien's skull. Its nose and mouth are covered up by another symbol that's stamped on top of it. But you'll see a circle of stars, which is basically placed right in the center of the alien's forehead to indicate that it is purely telepathic. You can see the black eyes, which are also obscured partially by the eagle symbol, but you can see the black eyes of the alien. We've got gray aliens printed on our money.
I'm looking at the bill right now, and I'm not seeing it yet. I'm sure I can find an analysis on it. I'll do some more digging.
I'll send you. Let me see here. I'll send you a better picture of this, so it'll be easy for you to see. Just 1 second here.
It's amazing how much stuff they can put into the back of our money, and then you circulate that around. And money is alchemy. Money is creating something out of nothing. It's transforming a microscopic piece of wood into, if you've got a $100 bill there, you could turn that into other elements and other materials and other services. You know what that looks like to me? That looks just like lamb that Aleister Crowley contacted and wrote about. Lamb, right. Looks like a giant gray.
It was Aiwass.
Aiwass and lamb are two different entities.
I was thinking it was Aiwass, the one that dictated the Book of the Law. Is what I was thinking, but I could be mistaken.
Well, lamb is a completely different entity. Aiwass is the supposed holy guardian angel of Aleister Crowley. And Lamb was a different entity that he made contact with, but they're both very fascinating. And Aiwass, who he says, well, Christian would look at Aiwass as the Antichrist, or as not as the Antichrist, but actually as the devil incarnate, the Lucifer, the fallen angel himself. He says that in his book 4.
This was long before gray aliens were even known about by the public. This happened to Crowley.
Yep, sure was. It was in the early 1900s.
This is a classic, as you can see, this is a classic image of a classic ET gray alien right there. And you can see where I was saying the circle of stars was right on the forehead to show that it's telepathic. Things don't get onto our money by accident.
Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. That's all just swamp gas. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. We have Derek Tyler with us. Now, he is author of the book Alien Contact, The Difficult Truth. What we will show you on the cover of the book here, it looks like I don't know, like a logo or an insignia of something that a military officer would have, but it's very far out. It's almost like a combination of a reptilian dragon consuming the planet within his gut. So that's fascinating. But it's interesting circumstances with. I just did a podcast on the possibility that ETs are clones based on data from Daryl Sims, which he says he used to work for the CIA and he's been a lifetime abductee, his son, his dad as well. And, he looks at it as very nefarious. He doesn't like it. Some people say, oh man, I want to get abducted. And other people say, it's happened to me and it isn't as cool as you think it is. So, first of all, I want to say thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So what exactly happened then with you as far as the experience that you had the first time?
By the way, I've known Daryl Sims since the 90s, and he's much closer to the truth than most people seem to be. The fact of being abducted, there's nothing good about it at all. It's nothing anyone should wish for. Um, by the time I started having my first memories of being abducted, even though apparently I'd been abducted prior to that, I'd already probably interviewed 3,000 abductees, I suppose, and contactees. I stopped counting back in the late 90s at 2,000, so I've added a lot more since then. One thing that you realize when you speak with that many abductees is that you hear basically the same story over and over from people who have absolutely no relation to each other. And in the beginning, my story was very much like that. I related in detail in the book. It's somewhat difficult to talk about the abductions themselves because one thing that they do to us is they seem to use a post-hypnotic suggestion, among other things, that makes it very uncomfortable for us to talk about these things. It doesn't seem to kick in when I write about them, but when I try to talk about them, I tend to get very jittery and nervous and pacing, and my chest tightens up and it becomes hard to breathe, et cetera, et cetera. So it's somewhat difficult to talk about them, but nevertheless, I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you've talked to Terry. Now, also, are you Irish and do you have any Native American blood?
I don't have any Native American blood. My mom's side was Scottish and English. My dad's side was Dutch.
Okay.
So I'm not Irish, although I understand that that's a common common indicator of some people, but
Not
it's
everybody,
not
though,
it's not
obviously.
everything.
Yeah.
And the RH negative factor, all that's necessary for that is to have one parent or one grandparent have RH negative, and you will be almost well, I don't know the exact percentage, but you have a far greater chance of being abducted if you have RH negative blood in your family.
Right. Absolutely. So I know it's in your book, and many people are going to have an opportunity, especially after they watch this podcast, to pick up Alien Contact, The Difficult Truth. It's available on Amazon. And folks, just so you know, every single review on Amazon is 5 stars. And as a matter of fact, there were so many 5-star reviews on there that were so quickly that I guess some of them were taken down. Derek was telling me the Amazon has some policy or something like that. I don't know exactly how that works, but the fact that one thing that I think is fascinating about just even only talking to you for less than 10 minutes here, Derek, is I can tell you seem nervous. And it's not like nervous in the sense where you've got like, okay, over 3,000 people and their experiences.
Yes.
Was it via phone? I mean, do you do hypnosis, regression sessions with
No,
them?
it was mostly online. I don't really recommend regression for people. As a matter of fact, I think it's generally a very terrible idea. Unless you have a certain specific reason that you feel you need to be regressed, I recommend that you don't do it, because when you undergo regressive hypnosis, you will eventually end up reliving those experiences as you recount them and re-experience them. It'll be just like having them happen to you again. And there's nothing there that you want to have to relive. I mean, some of the things are very uncomfortable and very frightening. And for most people, I would recommend that if you happen to not remember your abduction experiences, thank your lucky stars and let it go.
Well, when was your first experience? And if you can, give us as much detail as possible for the skeptics out there, and help me and yourself convert any skeptic out there that's saying no, this isn't true, this can't be true. I just was told on the TV the government said there's no such thing as alien sun, so I believe them. And I just got my
Well,
flu shot too. It's
I've
really
got
good.
I've got a whole chapter in my book about skeptics, and it basically takes their entire argument and dismantles it piece by piece and leaves nothing left in the end but the burning ruins of what used to be their position. Um, Other than that, I showed some signs earlier in my life that I didn't realize at the time, but they were classic abduction symptoms. One of them is that I had a tendency, starting when I was about 18, to burn out streetlights whenever I'd approach them. Not every time, but very often, sometimes 3 streetlights within a single block. When I would walk past them or when I would even drive near them, they would just blink off. And still, I didn't realize that I was an abductee, and I interviewed many abductees in the meantime without ever applying it to myself, even though actually Daryl Sims told me back in about 1998 that I better accept the fact that I was an abductee. I didn't believe it then either.
Do you have Rh negative blood?
I don't know what my blood type is, honestly. My grandmother did.
Okay.
I don't know what mine is. I should, but I don't. I'm embarrassed to say.
But that's all right. You know that your grandma had that blood type, so either way, you would at least have that hereditary